Oasis Audio presents An Amish Market by Amy Clipston, Kathleen Fuller, Kelly Irvin, and Vannetta Chapman. Read for you by Rebecca Gallagher. Lovebirds by Amy Clipston. Chapter 1. Ellie Lapp hummed to herself as she hung her freshly washed laundry on the line that stretched from the back porch to the barn. The warm May afternoon air filled her lungs, and the sun kissed her cheeks as she clipped her and her mother's dresses onto the line to dry. It was still so strange not to see Seth's trousers and shirts among the clothes she had laundered in the wringer washer earlier. She had to remind herself that she no longer had to care for his laundry, not since he died a month ago in an accident at the shed company where he worked. 1 month ago. She shivered despite the warm spring breeze. How could it have been that long already? It seemed like only yesterday that her big brother was talking and chuckling at the dinner table, sharing a joke or funny stories from his day spent building sheds. As though it was only yesterday that he called her Squirt instead of Ellie. Only yesterday that she was working in her garden when he threatened to drench her with water from her watering can if she didn't laugh at one of his silly jokes. But now Seth was gone, and since her father had died 14 years ago when she was only 5, Ellie and her mother were left alone in the too big and too quiet house on their small farm. "Ellie!" Her mother, Margaret, sounded urgent as she appeared in the doorway behind her. "Daisy escaped the pasture fence again, dummel." Ellie turned her head toward the gate leading to the small pasture and saw it was wide open, and Daisy the cow was trotting toward the road. "Ach, no," she muttered under her breath. Then she took off running after the cow, shouting, "Hoi, hoi!" On several occasions, she and Seth had retrieved wandering cows with the help of the neighbor's dog, Spike, and she longed for both Seth and Spike's help now. Corralling a cow was not easy when it was a one-person job. Ellie dodged puddles from last night's rain as she closed in on Daisy. "Daisy!" she shouted. "Daisy! Hoi, hoi!" She tried to mimic Seth's method of catching disobedient cows. She rushed closer, determined to get ahead of the animal and direct her back to the pasture. As Ellie closed in on Daisy, her feet began to slide. She realized too late that she'd run right into a puddle, and much to her dismay, her feet flew out from under her. She landed on her bottom in a puddle with a loud splat. When she looked down, she saw her purple dress, apron, stockings, and shoes were covered in dark brown mud. "Ellie!" a male voice called behind her. Ellie looked over her shoulder and saw Lloyd Blank, one of Seth's best friends from school, loping toward her. Members of the community, along with Seth's friends, had been taking turns coming over to help Ellie and her mother with the animals since Seth's death. Seth's friends were pleasant to Ellie, but Lloyd was the only one who had always taken the time to acknowledge her, and Ellie had had a secret crush on him since she was a preteen. She'd never told anyone, not even her closest friends, especially not Lloyd's sister Rebecca, that she liked him. It was a far-fetched dream to believe Lloyd would ever consider her more than an acquaintance, since she was the same age as Rebecca. Now here she sat in a puddle as his lean, 6'2" frame, brown hair, and powder blue eyes that reminded her of the brilliant sky in springtime raced toward her. The sleeves of his blue button-down shirt were rolled up on his arms to just above his elbows, revealing the muscles he'd developed from working on the Blank farm. Ellie fought the urge to cover her face with her hands as humiliation rained down on her. The boy she'd liked for years had managed to see her at her absolute worst. Could this day get any worse? When he reached her, Lloyd's lip twitched as if he were holding back a smile. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm okay." Ellie's cheeks heated with embarrassment. I didn't see the puddle. Need help? A smile spread across Lloyd's face as he held out his hand. At least her hands were still free of mud. Yeah, Ellie muttered, taking the outstretched hand. Donkey. He gently lifted her to her feet as if she weighed only a few pounds. She longed to find some place to hide away from his sparkling eyes, but instead she glided her hands down her apron, making mud splatter to the ground, then craned her neck to peer past him. Daisy is getting away. I'll get her before she reaches the road, Lloyd said. You stand ready at the gate. Lloyd followed the cow and Ellie ran to the fence. Her apron and dress felt heavier with the mud weighing them down, to say nothing of her shoes. She turned to see Lloyd had caught up with Daisy and was waving his arms wildly, yelling, Hoi, hoi, as he herded her back toward the pasture. Ellie silently marveled at his skill as he commanded the cow. He was an expert, just as Seth had been. Daisy trotted into the pasture, and Lloyd helped Ellie shut the heavy gate before turning to look at her. You have some mud on your cheek, he said with a grin. He looked like he was about to touch her face, but instead he pointed. It's right there. Ellie brushed her hand across her cheek. Did I get it? Lloyd shook his head. You smeared it. Ellie swiped her hand over her cheek again, but knew she'd probably only made it worse. This lock needs to be repaired, Lloyd said, now studying the latch. I'll work on that today. Donkey, Ellie gnawed her lower lip. She wanted to thank him for helping with Daisy, too, but she didn't want to gush. I'm glad you came along when you did. I clearly wasn't going to be able to persuade her to come back. Seth was the expert when it came to herding cows. Lloyd looked up from the latch. You were doing fine until the mud got the best of you. His blue eyes sparkled with amusement. I'm fro I could help. Mom and I appreciate all you're doing for the farm, she said as she rested a hand on the fence. You're a tremendous help. I haven't done much. Lloyd fiddled with the latch again. I wish I could do more, but I'm busy with my chores at home, too. I understand. Ellie searched for another subject to prolong the interaction. I heard the youth gathering is at your parents' house Sunday night. Yeah. Lloyd leaned against the fence. Rebecca and Marie are excited. They've been cleaning like crazy. It will be fun. When he responded with an unenthusiastic shrug, she was alarmed. You'll be there, right? She wanted to kick herself as the words spilled from her lips. Why did she have to sound so immature and eager? I suppose I'll be around somewhere, since I live there. He lifted his straw hat and raked his hand through his dark hair. I don't know if I'll mingle, since I'll be the oldest person there. Other than my folks, of course. 24 is too old for that. That's not true, she insisted. You're not too old to be a part of the youth group. You can still be an active member. He smiled. I'd make a better chaperone, but thanks for the encouragement. Seth used to go, Ellie continued, hoping to change his mind. He and Veronica would stop by sometimes. That's true. He mentioned that a few times. He seemed to agree with her only to avoid further discussion. So maybe I'll see you there. Okay. Ellie hoped he would. I guess I better work on this latch. Lloyd gestured toward the largest barn. Are Seth's tools still in there? Yeah, they are. I'll fix this so Daisy doesn't try to escape again. His eyes moved to her dress. You probably want to get cleaned up. Oh, right. She'd almost forgotten about the mud while they were talking, and she found herself feeling self-conscious once again. I'll see you later, Squirt. Lloyd grinned at her. Ellie pursed her lips. Why did he have to ruin the moment? My name is Ellie. I'm too grown up to be called Squirt. She squared her shoulders and started toward the house as tears threatened her eyes. Ellie was still just a child in his eyes. Why couldn't Lloyd see her as one of his peers? After washing some of the mud off at the outdoor pump, she rushed up the back steps and into the mudroom with renewed humiliation. She blew out a deep sigh as she sat on a bench to take off her shoes. She was being silly. After all, Squirt was the nickname Seth liked to call her. Lloyd knew that. Mum came into the mudroom. "Ellie, you're a mess. What happened?" "I fell in a puddle," Ellie said, her voice quaking. "But Lloyd was able to stop Daisy. She's back in the pasture, and he's going to fix the latch on the gate." "Oh, good." Mum clicked her tongue. "I suppose we'll need to get the wringer washer going again for your clothes." "Yeah, you're right." Ellie pulled off her apron as her mother disappeared into the kitchen. She looked out the window to the pasture fence where Lloyd was already working on the gate. Disappointment stole over her. She'd managed to look immature in front of Lloyd, the only boy she'd ever cared about. "Why aren't you going to get changed?" Mum called from the kitchen. "I am. I'll be right back." Ellie walked to the stairs and climbed to the second floor. As she reached the landing, her glance fell on the closed door leading to Seth's room, and she stopped. She took a shaky breath as she stared at the door, her hands trembling. The familiar sadness crept in. She hadn't seen the inside of her brother's room since the day of the accident, and the door called to her, inviting her to step inside and see the only tangible things he'd left behind. She turned the knob and slowly opened the door. Both the stale air and her grief nearly overcame her as she stepped into the room. Her eyes filled with tears as she imagined Seth grinning at her as he stood near the window. His smile always lit up a room. 6 years her senior, Seth had been tall and lean, towering over her by 4 inches. He'd become her protector and surrogate father after their father had died from a massive heart attack. But now Seth, with the same seafoam green eyes and sandy blonde hair their mother had passed on to Ellie, was gone too. Her lower lip trembled and tears spilled onto her cheeks. Ellie scanned the room, taking in all of Seth's things. Nothing had been disturbed since the accident. Her mother had avoided this room too. Seth's dresser stood in the corner with his favorite trinkets lined up on top of it, including the wooden sign that said love. Veronica, his fiancée, had given it to him on Valentine's Day. The pegs on the wall held his jackets, and with the closet door cracked open, she spotted his trousers hanging there. Her thoughts turned to Veronica, and a lump filled her throat as the events of the day of the accident assaulted her mind. Ellie had been baking when she'd heard a knock on the door and left the kitchen to see who it was. The bishop was on the front porch, telling her mother there had been a terrible accident. Her blood ran cold as he explained that Seth's boss had called him. Seth had fallen from the rafters of a shed. Ellie moved closer to her mother as the bishop explained that EMTs had come to the shop, but there was nothing they could do for Seth. He was already gone. They called the coroner, and Seth's body was going to be brought to their house. Her mother had dissolved into tears in Ellie's arms, and all Ellie could think about was how to tell Veronica. Ellie called Veronica and managed to tell her to come to their house as soon as she could. But when Veronica and her father had arrived, and she asked Ellie what had happened, the reality of the situation flooded Ellie's soul. Her voice broke on a sob as she told Seth's fiancé he was dead. In an instant, all their lives had been changed forever because their precious Seth was gone. Ellie and her mother moved in a fog during the next couple of weeks. Before Ellie knew it, Seth was buried, and she and her mother were going through the motions of each day, doing their best to keep their little farm running without Seth to help with the animals. She was thankful for his friends and their family members who came by to assist with the chores, and for all the meals their community provided as they grieved. But how would they continue to pay for their household expenses without Seth's paycheck from the shed company? Her mother hadn't talked about that yet, but it wouldn't be long before they'd have to. Ellie knew her mother was downplaying their financial need when people asked if they needed help. Her mother didn't want to burden anyone, but Ellie suspected the time would come soon when they would have to face reality. She stood and crossed the room to the window. After raising the green shade, she unlocked and lifted the window, sending a stream of warm, sweet air bursting into the stagnant room. She pushed away the memories of her brother and then hurried to her own room to change clothes.